Hey, welcome back, everyone. So, interesting news today. Biden has signed a war powers resolution. The United States is going to be sending troops to Africa. And I want to talk about what's going on with that. They're saying it's to protect U.S. assets on the ground and so on, but they're also not evacuating U.S. citizens. So, if they're sending troops there and they believe they should sign a war powers resolution in order to guard Americans and make sure they're okay, but they're also not going to be evacuating people, what are they doing? We'll go into this. Also, in Sudan, where the war is now brewing, you have fighters who've broken into one of the major virus laboratories, which contains several deadly viruses, which would be detrimental if they got out. The WHO is declaring it is extremely, extremely dangerous. And yes, they repeat extremely. And here we are. Get ready for the potential next pandemic if this whole thing heads south, and maybe even the beginning of a new war. As this is happening, Russia has declared that they have entered a hot war meaning guns and bullets, with the United States and with the West. And this is a big shift. The war, if you read some older writings, war is an extension of politics by other means. When diplomacy and normal political structures can no longer maintain stability or peace, or people can no longer come to agreements, the result is war. And there's several layers of war. There's proxy war, like Afghanistan and so on, where the U.S. was back in the Mujahideen, and Russia was fighting, of course, the Mujahideen. Like the later Afghanistan, where the CCP and Pakistan were supporting the Taliban, and the U.S. was fighting the Taliban. And now between Russia and Ukraine, where Russia's fighting Ukraine and the U.S. is arming and supporting Ukraine. The Pentagon leaked documents show that the U.S. actually has troops there helping the Ukrainian soldiers, and based on this, Russia is declaring they are now entering the next stage of a war with the United States, a hot war. Pretty serious stuff, but as this is happening, the Chinese Communist Party is stepping in and saying they need to broker peace. And if that happens, that's going to have huge implications for what the global structures of world governance are, and I'll explain this. Crazy stuff, folks. A lot going on. Real quick, this is the last live Q&A in the morning we'll be doing on Crossroads. Crossroads is going prime time. We're still going to, don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. We're going to be doing the show 5 days a week. The time is going to be different. So we're going to be 7 p.m. Eastern time. That's going to be 5 days a week. We're still going to be on Epoch TV, but we're also going to be on cable TV as well, starting on May 15th. Just as a heads up, we still will have the chat going and so on, so y'all can still chat. One of the big differences, just that you're going to see over time. So for the next couple weeks, I'm only going to do a monologue. And then next month on the 15th, we'll start doing the full show, and it's more like a Tucker Carlson style. I'll have guests on and so on. So it's going to be more of that vein. I'll do my analysis, and we'll see about doing a Q&A or something like that. I know, I'm sorry, folks. It's going to be good, though. It's going to be a huge shift, and this is going to hopefully propel us, further into the world. We've been kind of stuck a little bit in an echo chamber just because we're censored so bad. So this is a big move for us, and one that will really help move things forward. It's going to be actually pretty good, I think, and interesting timing too with Tucker and Dan Bongino, and I don't know if they're competing with us, but BuzzFeed News going belly up. Really wild stuff. I will still read your comments, so if you're writing comments on the show, I will still go over them and so on. So there'll be some of that still. Thank you so much for your support, folks. And real quick too, if follow us for updates. I have not forgotten about the book list. In fact, I submitted to my producer my first recommendations. We're in the process of just building the website right now. If you want updates on Crossroads, go to Crossroads_Josh on Twitter. And you can also find same name on Instagram if you want updates on the show, scheduling, and also on the book list that we're releasing. So we're going to push forward with the whole book club again. That said, folks, thank you so much. And let's jump into the first stories for the day. Now, I want to start up from the top. This was actually, in my opinion, the biggest news story around, but of course, everyone was focused on Tucker. Tucker Carlson getting dropped by Fox News. It's not clear whether it was an agreement between them. It's not clear whether he got fired. It's a lot of rumor right now. Other media, I saw some reports claiming it was based on his internal communications, criticizing Fox management. I personally don't buy that. But they're using that as the excuse. If you were to ask me, it might have something to do with the fact that BlackRock massively increased their investment at Fox, and if you're playing the BlackRock game, that means ESG score, environmental social governance score, and it means you got to play by the rules. And I assume that Tucker and probably Dan Bongino did not want to play by the new rules. Keep in mind, so Vanguard and BlackRock are two of the biggest investors at Fox. If you were to ask me, that's what's really going on. Just in my personal opinion. I'm not saying for a fact, but that's the sense I get, just on a personal opinion again. That said, though, one of the bigger stories that did happen, which I think should have been, frankly, the biggest story in the country, folks, Biden signed a war powers resolution. We're maybe going to war. How is that not the biggest story in the whole dang country? This reminds me of during the pandemic when the Pentagon came out and they're like, oh, hey, UFOs exist. Here's a video of a UFO. And everyone was like, oh, God, like, I don't have time for this right now. Don't tell me about aliens. Like, I'm dealing with this virus. And like, nobody even cared about the Pentagon UFO videos, because everyone was so busy thinking about other stuff. It's kind of the same thing. Oh, yeah, and by the way, Biden just signed a war powers resolution. Oh, yeah, what's next on the list? It's pretty incredible that such a massive story just kind of got pushed to the sidelines. But let me explain what happened, because in my opinion, this is actually the biggest story in the country right now. So let me show you the actual announcement from the White House. This is the official statement that they issued. It says, letter to the Speaker of the House and President pro tempore of the Senate consistent with the War Powers Resolution, Public Law 93-148. And it says, at my direction, and this is Joe Biden, him stating this, at my direction, United States Armed Forces personnel have conducted an operation to evacuate United States personnel and others from Khartoum, Sudan. In response to that's the capital of Sudan, by the way, to the deteriorating security situation in Sudan. To conduct and support this operation, United States Armed Forces personnel with appropriate combat equipment, meaning they're armed for war, deployed to Djibouti, Ethiopia, and Sudan. Djibouti is northern tip of Africa. It's it's right on the water of one of the major trade choke points. The United States Armed Forces personnel will remain deployed in Djibouti to protect United States personnel and others until the security situation no longer requires their presence, and additional forces are prepared to deploy to the region if required. And I'll explain why this matters. Biden says that I directed this action consistent with my responsibility to protect United States citizens, both at home and abroad, and in furtherance of United States national security and foreign policy interests, pursuant to my constitutional authority as Commander-in-Chief, head of the military, and Chief Executive, the President, and to conduct United States foreign relations. I am providing this report as part of my efforts to keep the Congress fully informed, consistent with the War Powers Resolution, Public Law 93-148. I appreciate the support of the Congress in these actions. Now, understand what this means. Biden, again, you have a developing war taking place in Sudan right now. Biden has sent troops to Djibouti to oversee any kind of evacuations taking place. Djibouti was one of the major staging grounds for U.S. air operations within that whole region, including actually into the Middle East. Into a lot of our operations, during Operation Iraqi Freedom and the, of course, war in Afghanistan, you typically had a lot of U.S. personnel deployed in Djibouti at our military base there. helping oversee those operations and deal with the whole situation. And so it's not unusual that we would have troops there. The difference is Biden saw it necessary to make a war powers resolution. Now, did they write a war powers resolution for other minor conflicts or other, let's say, operations that people would argue maybe we should have declared war on? Not really. Not all, I mean, sometimes they did, of course, but not really necessarily. There's two ways to think about this now, as far as I see it. One is they see this escalating into a larger war. And because of that, they're making a war powers resolution to oversee evacuations, which would not necessarily be a necessary step if you're just, running security and overseeing this type of thing. The United States have security forces all over the world. This is normal operations. You wouldn't normally see the necessity of a war powers resolution to do that. And so again, based on that, there is the real possibility that they see this escalating. And Biden, in writing, in this declaration of a war powers resolution, right, in this declaration, he notes that troops armed for war have deployed there. And there's also the written stipulation that he may increase the troop presence if the situation demands it, meaning the legal standard is there in writing to escalate this into a large-scale war. The other possibility is this. So again, one is this is just an actual evacuation. They're actually just doing the One is they're doing the evacuation, and the other, as I just mentioned, is the possibility of this. They see this actually expanding. On the evacuation side, you could say that maybe he does see this as just a normal evacuation. He's going through the normal procedures to oversee a military level evacuation. There's a developing civil war, and of course, any real evacuation would require troops prepared for war in order to carry out those operations. And he just doesn't want a repeat of Afghanistan because, again, the bad pullout from Afghanistan was so damaging to him individually, right? And to the United States in terms of its global image. He doesn't want to repeat that. And so it's one of these two scenarios as far as I see it, or maybe a combination of the two. But there's something that makes me wonder about that second idea. Is this really about an evacuation? Or maybe this is about them seeing this expanding into a full-scale war. The thing that makes me question whether this is really about an evacuation is this. Washington Free Beacon, let me show you. State Department won't evacuate American citizens from Sudan as conflict intensifies. So Biden's saying this is to oversee the evacuation of U.S. personnel. Now, you could say that's maybe diplomatic personnel or military personnel and so on. But normally you'd think that extends to U.S. citizens. They've declared now they will not be evacuating American citizens. Free Beacon says, the State Department says that it has no plans to evacuate the 16,000 American citizens in Sudan as fighting between the country's military leaders plunges the country further into chaos. The U.S. military on Saturday evacuated the 100 officials working at the U.S. Embassy in Khartoum, citing danger to embassy staff. But speaking to reporters over the weekend, a State Department official said that evacuation efforts would not extend to civilians. They said, quote, as a result of that uncertain security picture, as a result of the unavailability of the civilian airport, we don't foresee coordinating a U.S. government evacuation of our fellow citizens in Sudan at this time in the coming days. Undersecretary for Management Ambassador John Bass told reporters over the weekend, and he said, quote, we don't anticipate those security conditions are going to change in the near term. So they don't have access to an airport to evacuate citizens. They don't think they have the ability to rescue American citizens. And so if Biden is deploying the military and has signed a war powers resolution with the stated intent to do help with evacuations, and they don't plan on doing evacuations, then what are they doing there? And why, most importantly, would Biden see it necessary to actually write a war powers resolution if you're doing this when under normal circumstances they probably wouldn't take that as a necessary step. This, to me, suggests they see this expanding into something larger. Now, the caveat with that, the technicality with that, is that the Biden resolution states that this is about evacuating U.S. personnel, meaning government employees, possibly military personnel and others, which you could say technically may not include civilians. And so maybe that's the technicality there. They believe they can evacuate personnel, even though they say they don't have access to an airport. But if they can evacuate personnel, and if they can actually evacuate personnel, what makes them able to evacuate them if they cannot evacuate the citizens because of the lack of the availability of an airport? Which type of transportation is available to personnel that is not available to citizens? In other words, it's a very strange picture. And frankly, these anomalies within the picture make me question whether the surface stated purpose of this is actually what's really going on. These are the types of things as an investigative reporter that I look at. Now, folks, I want to go into something even bigger taking place, which is that in Sudan, the fighters have breached one of the virus laboratories. And this seems to be a weird pattern we're seeing now because Russia and Ukraine, they're making a big deal as well about the virus laboratories. And of course, the virus origin is suspect of COVID-19 is now pretty much credibly suspected to have come from a Chinese laboratory. So this is becoming something pretty significant. Before we go further, though, we do have a sponsor today. Today's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. Now, folks, as we've been talking about, inflation is going to continue and likely get worse. Even Fed Chair Powell is warning us to brace ourselves. Well, there's one way to hedge against inflation. American Hartford Gold makes it simple and easy to diversify your savings and retirement accounts with physical gold and silver. With one short phone call, they can have physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or into your IRA or 401k. American Hartford Gold is one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A-plus rating from the BBB and thousands of satisfied clients. If you call them right now, they'll give you up to $2,500 of silver and a free safe on qualifying orders. So don't wait. Call them now. That's 877-260-2764. Again, 877-260-2764. Or text Joshua to 65532. Again, that's 877-260-2764. Or text Joshua to 65532. And big thanks out to American Hartford Gold for sponsoring today's episode. Now, folks, back to what's happening in Sudan. Again, this is where the rumor mill is going to get running. And I'm not saying that in a denigrating way, because let's be honest with ourselves, the rumor mill has gotten things right more often than the official narratives. The rumor mill of, gee, why are they holding these virus games around a coronavirus, releasing a pandemic on the world before COVID-19. Gee, I hope they don't plan on releasing a coronavirus pandemic on the world. And then 1 or 2 years later, hey, they released a coronavirus pandemic on the world. Lo and behold. Gee, they're holding Marburg outbreak drills, and they're talking about these types of, monkeypox type things, pox pandemic. Gee, I hope nothing happens with this. Oh, look, suddenly monkeypox and Marburg disease are a big deal. Lo and behold. And now people are saying, oh, gee, the Sudanese fighters are breaking into this laboratory. Biden has deployed U.S. troops there to do evacuations, but they're not actually going to do evacuations, as the State Department is saying. Gee, I hope they don't release a new pandemic on the world. And that's where we are right now. Take it for what you will. Don't write off the conspiracy theorists, though, because they've gotten it more right than some of us have. Let's be honest with ourselves. As much as I'd like to say it's rumor, right? Regardless, this is the current situation. Daily Mail has the story, and they say WHO warns of huge biological risk as Sudan fighters storm national laboratory holding samples of polio, cholera, and measles. It says the World Health Organization warned on Tuesday that a huge U.S. biological risk, and that's their exact quote, associated with the occupation of a central public health lab as fighters stormed the building. Now, with these buildings, there are depending on the level of security, right? If you go like there's P3 labs, there's P4 labs, there's different levels of security. Typically, there are pretty serious requirements for safety, especially if you enter certain rooms. Some of these laboratories, for example, even require you to wear specialized suits that are filled with, air in order to create like a barrier between you and any possible pathogens. There are requirements on even air tunnels and so on in order to make sure that air doesn't leave the room. There's all kinds of very technical, very important safety procedures which people are heavily trained in order to follow to ensure that leaks don't happen. And even with all those very heavy safety protocols in place, leaks still happen. Now, what happens when you get a bunch of crazy rebels who break into that laboratory and, don't know any of these safety protocols, we could assume, at least probably most of them don't. And they, of course, need to do room clearing. They, of course, have firearms and grenades. There may be fighting in there. And if there is any, let's say, accidental discharge of a firearm or intentional discharge of a firearm, or there's a disagreement, or someone trips and falls and hits something, or if someone kicks down a door or breaks into a room that was supposed to have constant, protocols to make sure air doesn't even leave that room, what do you think is going to happen? Well, this is where the WHO is actually accurately in this point saying that there is a, quote, huge biological risk associated with what they're doing right now. It says the World Health Organization said that fighters in conflict-ravaged Sudan had occupied a central public laboratory in the capital of Khartoum, holding samples of diseases including polio and measles, and creating a, quote, extremely dangerous situation. And they actually do, in their exact quote, say extremely twice, extremely dangerous, is the exact quote. They state, there is a huge biological risk associated with the occupation of the Central Public Health Lab by one of the fighting parties. And the individual, Abid, said technicians were unable to access the National Public Health Laboratory to secure the materials, meaning they're not being allowed to go in there to make sure that things don't fall into the wrong hands, or make sure they're improperly handled, or make sure they're properly handled, make sure they're not improperly handled. And he said, quote, this is the main concern. No accessibility to the lab technicians to go to the lab and safely contain the biological material and safely contain the biological materials and substances available. He declined to specify which side had seized the facility, so we actually don't know which side has taken over. We assume it's the rebels, given the fact that we would assume the other side would not do such a thing and may cooperate. But again, who knows? It's a war. That being said, they're noting polio, measles. If it's a virus laboratory, they're probably experimenting on those things. And if they're experimenting on those things, we can also assume new viruses, ones we don't know about yet. And we could also assume that there's a much larger list of viruses and pathogens, including some they may not even be naming because people probably don't know what they are. And they're telling the media things that are probably of a mid-level of concern, not representing the full-scale possible threat of the contagions contained therein. Anyways, folks, that's a really big deal, or as the WHO even says, something that is, quote, extremely dangerous. And the safety of Africa now rests on a group of fighters who have decided to occupy a virus laboratory. I'd actually agree with the WHO for once. This is an extremely dangerous situation. And this brings back the question of Biden's war powers resolution, the fact that he has stationed American military personnel in Djibouti and going to be carrying operations out, we presume, in Sudan, that these are claiming to be part of evacuation operations when they admit they don't have the capability for evacuations because they don't control an airport. And they note that while they're evacuating personnel, they're not going to be evacuating citizens, which raises the question of what they're actually doing there. Well, it's getting pretty crazy. So I don't want to speculate too much, but it looks like something's happening they're not telling us about. Just being blunt. It looks like they're not telling us something, as far as I can see it, because the narrative isn't lining up. Anyways, wild stuff. That being said, I've talked about the possibility of a war, of even a third world war. In fact, Trump is even campaigning, saying Biden's going to cause World War III. And we see now that Russia has declared that it is now in a hot war with the United States. And hot war means guns and bullets and bombs and tanks and so on. This means troops on the ground fighting each other directly. Russia has made this declaration now. Breitbart has a story. They say Russia, and of course this is not like an official, Putin came out and said, we're declaring war on America. It's not like that. But it is them acknowledging that they believe that they are in a conflict of that level with the United States. Breitbart says the United States is playing with fire and engaging in a hot hybrid war with Russia. Having already graduated from a Cold War stage, a Russian government minister has claimed, incredibly even going so far as to blame the U.S. for rising nuclear tensions. And he said the new Cold War is already over. Because, again, they were saying that tensions between the U.S. and Russia and really Ukraine as a proxy fighting force between Ukraine and between the U.S. and Russia is very similar to how things were happening during the Cold War. They're saying that stage of the conflict is over, and they're now engaging in a more direct conflict with the United States. A new Cold War is already over. A Kremlin spokesperson said, apparently looking past Russia's own role in invading Ukraine and accusing the United States of playing with fire by pushing the world towards nuclear war that he insists Russians wish to avoid. It says the comments come just hours after Russia announced it had deployed nuclear-capable missiles on the borders of NATO in Belarus and refitted Belarusian jets with the equipment to carry and drop nuclear bombs. Moscow made a tacit accusations that the United States was to blame for this, saying Russia was doing no more than Americans already did in stationing nuclear weapons in the territory of European allies. Speaking Wednesday, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov, made the hot war comments and said, per release of this discussion from a government-controlled news outlet and propaganda service, quote, I think we have already passed this period of Cold War. Now we are in the phase of a hot conflict with the United States. We are witnessing the direct involvement of that country, the United States, in a hybrid war with Russia on various fronts. Now, that being said, Ukraine was talking about launching actual operations deep into Russia. And allegedly, at least, the Biden administration prevented them from doing that. Russia could take this as a sign of the U.S. actually restraining Ukraine. But there's mixed analysis on this, whether Ukraine was actually going to do that at all, or whether it's we're going to do it now, you better give us more money type thing, which they can keep saying indefinitely until we decide to stop giving them money. It depends on which side of this conflict you're on, basically. But again, believe what you will. The Biden administration allegedly did restrain Ukraine from launching deep strikes against Russia. CNN had the story. They say Ukraine is prepping to strike back against Russia. Timing will be key. And they say weather the storm, exhaust the enemy, and then strike back. This has been the mantra of Ukraine's military for months, when echoed by U.S. and NATO officials since the winter. So much for the idea, but can it be executed? And so if, where, when, and with what? Meaning, well, what are you going to give them? What kind of money are you going to give them? It says even the Ukrainians themselves may not yet know, as they study the 1,000-kilometer front line for Russian vulnerabilities, just as they did when suddenly launching the surprise September offensive in the northeast region of Kharkiv. But they are aware it will be a crucial chapter in the conflict. Major General Kyrlo Budanov, head of Ukraine's defense intelligence, said in an interview last month that Russia and Ukraine will fight a decisive battle this spring, meaning probably now. And this battle will be the final one before this war ends. Now, they are claiming that the current battles taking place in Ukraine are going to decide who wins and who loses and what happens after this. This is important because China, interestingly, has stepped in to negotiate the peace, which we'll get into in a minute. And that has huge implications for the U.S., meaning this is no longer just a U.S., Russia, NATO type conflict. This is about who governs the whole world, essentially, type conflict. Back to the point, though, CNN says that suggests the Ukrainians may take their time to maximize capabilities. Predictions are a fool's errand. There'll be plenty of bluff and disinformation about the intentions in the coming weeks, but preparations are well underway. They say the essential preconditions for Ukrainian counteroffensive include the completion of training and integration of new units, degrading the Russian rear, a resilience logistics chain, and real-time intelligence. Now, there's a couple major blows being done to this right now. One of the major blows being the fact that, well, media tends to blow the lid on everything. If you are planning to launch an invasion, and again, war is mostly through deception. Deception is a key part of warfare through most of human history. Even medieval battles oftentimes included ruses. There was always an element of deception. If you look at ancient Japanese and ancient Chinese military tactics, Sun Tzu would write about the importance of deception in war. If you read books like Outlaws of the Marsh, you'll find that in every single battle, this is in China, every single battle included, anyone that won at least, very strong use of deception and smokescreens and illusions. If you go into the West, we'd say, oh, well, the West never fought like that. Yeah, they did. Look at the Vikings. Look at the Romans. Look at look at the different ways of unconventional warfare that you saw happen, including with Machiavellianism, right? If you read Machiavelli's The Prince, you'll see the nature of deception and unconventional war and short of war tactic. Read the diary of Napoleon. Read the writings of Alexander the Great. You'll find deception is a huge part of war, no matter what part of the world you're in. And the problem that America has, if they want to launch an offensive, every major media is going to have front page pieces telling you exactly how many troops they're sending, exactly where they're sending them, exactly what they're going to be doing. Everybody's posting on Twitter and social media and doing TikTok dances, showing them dancing to the helicopter and then posting like where they're going to go to. And everybody says every single thing they're going to do before they do it. And then what do you think is going to happen? Our adversaries are following their enemies, us, on TikTok. Like, this guy's doing a Fortnite dance, at that road down the street. Let's go check that out. And it gets our troops killed. And it blows the lid on every single thing we do. And it's utterly detrimental to U.S. strategy and utterly detrimental to the lives of our young men and women on the front lines of wars. It's this type of stuff that gets people killed. And unfortunately, our press has a terrible track record of getting inside sources that blow the lid on things like this and get our troops killed. Anyways, it's very hard for the United States to run military operations because of this. Because we are a country that has a huge amount of transparency. We are very transparent with, things we probably shouldn't be transparent on. And unfortunately, due to corruption, we're overly protected of things that probably deserve some dang transparency. But this brings us to another thing that took place just recently, which is there was a huge Pentagon leak. There were documents made public. An individual posted different classified files on public networks, including Discord, which is a chat group. It runs chat groups and so on, and other platforms like that. A concerning note on that is they're talking about creating additional security measures to ensure leaks like that don't happen in the future. I should note they already have technology like that, insider threat. They call it insider threat detection for the military, which makes me concerned on 2 points. One is they already have monitoring techniques and technologies for military. If they expand it, they can only expand it by monitoring public public networks, which means they're going to be surveilling you and I in ways that I believe violate the Constitution. We're protected from illegal searches and seizures. Unfortunately, going back to George Bush and the Patriot Act, a lot of our basic freedoms of being protected from government surveillance were thrown out the window, and we let it happen. But getting back to the point of this leak, the Pentagon leak said some very serious things about Ukraine. Among the things it said was that keep in mind, this could be disinformation. It's possible this is disinformation. It is possible America's playing 4D chess and the Pentagon's releasing false information to deceive not only our foreign adversaries, but our adversaries in the media as well. I'd say many of whom are basically acting like foreign adversaries at this rate, depending on the conflict. But the Pentagon leak said something very concerning. One of the main things it said was that actually casualty numbers are different from what we've been told, that Ukraine has been losing a lot of troops, and that Russian casualties are not nearly as high as we've been told they are, suggesting that Ukraine is losing the war. Now, that might not be true because other people have said the opposite, and there is what I would consider credible evidence saying the opposite. War, as I mentioned before, is deception. By its nature, it's going to be hard to tell what is true and what is not true. And anytime you see any kind of public reporting on war, keep that in mind. It's possible, even from a very reputable source, that what you're seeing may not be true. In fact, I know for a fact, because I have friends who used to serve in these things, even a lot of public information about war is not true. A lot of it is fake. There's a huge amount of deception. And there are groups that intentionally release false information, including in America, in order to mislead not only foreign adversaries, but even the American press. Take it for what you will, in other words. But back on the Pentagon documents, something big is happening with this, which is Russia is taking this as evidence of U.S. deeper involvement in the war. And based on their taking of that evidence, they're expanding the war. And America is what they believe America is the real adversary with this. That said, folks, let's jump over to Epoch TV exclusively for the rest of this. I went a bit longer on YouTube and so on. Let's jump over to Epoch TV, and I'll go deeper into this and I'll explain what's happening. That said, let me show you a quick trailer, and then we'll jump over. I'll see you in a bit. Hi there, Josh Philipp here. Our values are being assaulted every day by the lies that mainstream media perpetuate, and it's put our country on the edge of a knife, with no one knowing whether or not we'll make it. If you love our country and the freedoms we celebrate, I'll give you the number one thing you can do to ensure this country stays this way. Now, you probably feel that's impossible. Maybe you think the situation is too far gone. I felt the same way until I joined the Epoch Times, started this show, and saw the power that truth can bring our growing audience. That's why I wanted to tell you there is something you can do. You can ensure the truth gets out there from my show. And by supporting me, you're supporting the Epoch Times, and you're supporting independent journalism that is, bar none, this country's best hope in surviving the onslaught against our values and freedoms. Shockingly, most people don't even realize that almost every mainstream media company belongs to one of 6 huge corporations, all with their own agendas and demanding shareholders. Some even think it's a good thing. Folks, how can we ensure the reporting is free of bias? We can't. This is why my show and the Epoch Times is so critical. We're completely independent. Our only interest is in traditional journalism and reporting truthfully. The Epoch Times is the antidote. It's time to replace these prevalent narratives with the truth and get back to the basics. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All you have to do is subscribe to Epoch TV, and you'll get so much more in return. With your subscription, you get access to hundreds of exclusive videos, over 30 channels, live shows, events, and even hard-hitting documentaries and films that are changing the game. Just click on the link in the description of the show, and you're on your way. Thanks so much for watching me and for your support, and remember, the only way to truly protect our freedoms is to stay informed. Great. Folks, before we jump over, just for you on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Rumble, we are going to be transitioning to a primetime show. And so we're going to be changing the show. Just a quick note, Crossroads is going to be moving to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. So be sure to join us when we premiere. For the next couple weeks until the 15th of next month, I'll be doing just monologues 5 days a week. After the 15th, we'll launch the full new show. And that's going to be, in style closer to like a Tucker Carlson type show, where I'll do monologues and, of course, my analysis. And then we'll bring in a lot of guests, just as a note of how that's going to work. So 15th is when the full show launches. But again, next week, tune in. We'll be doing, of course, the monologues and so on. Again, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. It's still going to be on all of our normal channels. So still tune in. Also on Epoch TV, where we're going to have our live chats and so on as well. But it's going to be on cable as well, so be sure to check the cable TV lineups for NTD News. Again, I'm still on Epic TV, but we're broadcasting through NTD. Also, be sure to follow Crossroads Josh, Crossroads_Josh, Twitter, Instagram, and other places for updates. And folks, thank you for your support. This is a big new chapter for us. We're finally breaking through that big wall of censorship, and so, I feel like we're doing some good stuff, but my hands have been kind of tied behind my back because of censorship, and so this is us finally breaking those chains and getting out there more. It's going to be a big development for us, big stuff in the works, and I'm glad to have you all with me. Thank you for your support, and good times ahead. A lot going on. All right, let's jump over to Epoch TV exclusively, and I will see you there. And folks, thank you so much for being here.